when my daughter raised her glass. I thought she was finally going to say my name. Instead, she looked straight at me and said, "You don't belong here. Leave." 200 faces turned to watch me stand up, my heart cracking louder than the silence. My name is Berenice Caldwell. Let me tell you how we reached that moment. The words still echoed in my chest like broken glass, but a few hours earlier, my day had started with quiet determination. In the little cedar cabin I called home, the morning sun filtered faintly through the curtains as I stood before the mirror. My hand smoothed the navy dress I had pressed 3 times over, making sure not a wrinkle dared show. It was simple, modest, but I wanted it to speak of dignity. I leaned closer, searching my reflection for traces of doubt, brushing away the faint lines of fatigue around my mouth, as though by sheer will I could present only hope. On the dresser lay the silver music box, cool and heavy in my palm when I picked it up. Its corners bore the tiny scratches of time, but when I wound the key, the melody still rose clear, carrying the memory of my mother who had passed it to me. It was the one relic of her I had kept all these years, and now, after decades of protecting it, I had decided it should belong to Serena. I pressed it against my chest, whispering a silent prayer that it might remind her of where she came from, of the love and the sacrifices that had always stood behind her. The scent of fresh coffee lingered in the air, untouched. My stomach was too tight for breakfast. Instead, I sat on the edge of the bed, letting the weight of the music box rest on my lap as thoughts of the past rushed in. I remembered the winter nights when I had finished a double shift at the hospital, only to trudge home through the snow, boots soaked through, arms aching. I would barely set my bag down before checking Serena's homework, making sure she was warm, fed, and cared for. I remembered mornings when the cold air stung my cheeks as I walked her to the school bus after working 12 hours on my feet. Exhaustion had lived in my bones, but watching her wave from the window always kept me moving. Every step, every sacrifice was for the hope of giving her more than I ever had. I rose again, fastening the clasp of a simple chain around my neck, and glanced once more at the reflection in the mirror. Today will be different, I told myself. Today she'll see me. The phone rang, pulling me from my thoughts. I reached for it, recognizing the familiar number of my neighbor and friend. Her voice was warm as she congratulated me, but her words carried a warning. "Don't expect too much, Berenice. She's part of a different world now." I laughed softly, a sound meant to reassure her, but more to convince myself. I know, but maybe today she'll look at me differently. After hanging up, I lingered a moment, letting the silence of the cabin settle around me. The walls had seen decades of quiet meals alone, holidays spent with only the glow of the television, birthdays where I'd lit a candle and made a wish for Serena's happiness. This day felt like the culmination of those years, a chance for my daughter to finally acknowledge the mother who had always been there in the shadows. I slipped the music box into a velvet pouch, tucked it carefully into my purse, and reached for my coat. The chill outside bit at my face as I stepped onto the porch, but it couldn't touch the fragile flame of hope I carried inside. As the taxi pulled up, I held on to that flame, believing, truly believing, that when Serena saw me that evening, her smile would hold not just politeness, but recognition. Recognition of the woman who had walked through storms for her, who had given everything without asking anything back. I clutched the handle of the door as I climbed into the back seat. My hands trembled, not from fear, but from the sheer anticipation of what I longed for most, the chance, at last, to be seen by my own child. The taxi wound its way through Boston's busy streets before pulling up to a hotel that shimmered with light. From the outside, it looked like a palace. Glass doors glinting, chandeliers sparkling inside, valets in crisp uniforms rushing to open car doors for guests stepping out in gowns and tuxedos. I smoothed my dress once more before stepping onto the sidewalk, clutching the velvet pouch with the music box inside as though it were a lifeline. Inside, the scent of lilies and roses hung in the air, white blooms spilling from tall crystal vases at every corner. The glow of candles reflected off glasses of champagne, their golden bubbles rising like tiny promises of joy. The whole place radiated extravagance, a kind of grandeur I had only ever seen in magazines, never lived in. I approached the check-in desk where a young man with a clipboard stood. "Name?" he asked politely, eyes never lifting from the list. I gave it, and he ran a finger down the page. His tone didn't change, but his words did. "Yes, you're at table 15. Right this way, ma'am." He gestured toward the back of the hall, close to the swinging kitchen doors. My smile faltered, but I forced it back into place. "Thank you," I murmured, even though my chest had tightened. Table 15. Near the kitchen. I tried not to think about what it meant. On the way, I passed the front rows near the altar, where the ceremony had already been set. White ribbons trailed down polished pews, reserved with little signs that said family. But as I glanced closer, I didn't see my name or even familiar faces. Instead, those rows were filled with Serena's colleagues in sleek suits, her fiancé's college friends, and relatives from his side. Their voices rose in easy laughter, their glasses already clinking. I kept walking. At the table I'd been assigned, the people looked up, polite but clearly unsure of who I was. One woman leaned toward me after a moment and whispered, "So, how do you know the bride?" I hesitated, the question catching in my throat. Then I said it simply, "I'm her mother." Her eyes widened, surprise flashing across her face. She recovered quickly, offering a thin smile, but there was something in her expression, confusion, disbelief, that struck me harder than her words, as though she couldn't reconcile the image of the glowing bride she'd just seen with the woman standing in front of her. I sat down, folding my hands tightly in my lap, as though stillness could keep my heart from sinking. From across the room, I caught sight of Serena. She was radiant, her laughter carrying over the music, her arm looped delicately through another woman's, a woman in a pale blue gown, elegant and confident. Serena leaned in close, smiled up at her, and said something I couldn't hear, but I saw her lips form the word clear as glass, "Mom." The word landed like a blade. I bit down hard on the inside of my cheek, forcing myself not to react, not to cry, not to draw attention. My fingers pressed against the outline of the music box through the fabric of my purse, as though the weight of it could steady me. At that moment, it wasn't just distance I felt. It was replacement. In the very place where I thought I would belong most, I had been quietly erased. Dinner began, and with it, the reality of where I had been placed. Table 15 was filled with people who looked as lost as I did, an uncle from the groom's side who kept checking his watch, a coworker Serena barely knew, a couple who spoke only to each other. We were the extras, the overflow, not family, not friends, just names that needed chairs. I smiled when eyes met mine, trying to play my part, but I kept waiting for Serena to break away from the glittering circle at the center of the room and come to me. She didn't. She moved from table to table, laughter flowing freely, her smile reserved for those who belonged to her new life. At some point, I slipped the music box from my purse and opened it in my lap. The delicate tune spilled softly, barely audible above the hum of voices and clinking silverware. The woman beside me leaned over. "That's beautiful," she said kindly. Where did you find it? I closed the lid gently, stroking its worn edges. It's been in my family for years. I wanted to pass it on to my daughter tonight. She smiled, but it was tinged with pity rather than admiration. Her gaze lingered on me a beat too long, and I knew she saw me not as a proud mother offering a legacy, but as a woman clinging to something fragile. Then came the words that froze me in place. From just behind, two men at another table whispered, unaware or uncaring that I could hear them. Strange, one said. She told us her mother abandoned her years ago. The other lowered his voice, but not enough. Said she was bitter, always dragging her down. Toxic. My fork slipped from my hand, clattering against the plate. The sound made my neighbor glance at me, concerned, but I waved it off, throat locked tight. My chest burned, and for a moment I thought I might collapse right there at the table. Abandoned her? Bitter? Toxic? I sat rigid, my hands clasped around the music box so tightly the edges bit into my skin. My mind raced to defend her, to tell myself I'd misheard. It must be a mistake. She wouldn't say that about me. She couldn't. But the words had already sunk in. I stared across the hall, searching for her face among the sea of people, my daughter shining in a world I no longer recognized. My pulse pounded as a truth I didn't want to believe pressed in on me. She had not just left me behind, she had rewritten me. And everyone else believed her version. I sat frozen at table 15, the music box pressed against my ribs as though it might hold me together. The glow from the chandeliers bathed the front of the hall in gold, but where I sat, shadows swallowed everything. I whispered to myself, when it's her turn, she'll remember me. She has to. Nathaniel took the microphone first, his voice calm, steady, gracious. He thanked his parents, his colleagues, his circle of friends. Each word floated politely over the room, and though I noticed the omission, I told myself not to mind. It was his moment. I waited. Then Serena rose. She looked dazzling in her gown, light catching on the crystals stitched into the fabric. My heart thumped as she lifted her glass. This was it, I thought. My name would come. Her smile was radiant. I want to thank my chosen family, the ones who stood by me, who believed in me, who brought light into my life. Family isn't always blood. It's who you choose. The room broke into applause. I leaned forward, willing her to glance my way with softness, with recognition. Instead, her eyes found mine with a chilling precision. Her voice dropped, cold as stone. And those who bring nothing but negativity, they don't belong here today. Mother, I want you to leave. The applause died at once. The silence was so thick I could hear my pulse pounding in my ears. Every face in the room turned toward me. My skin burned hot, shame flooding me so quickly it left me dizzy. The music box trembled in my grip, my knuckles white as I clung to it. I rose slowly, spine stiff, refusing to crumple under the weight of 200 eyes. Murmurs swept the tables. Did she just throw out her mother? Someone whispered. I felt stripped bare. The navy dress I had chosen so carefully seemed garish now, a costume mocking me. The music box, once a symbol of love, felt ridiculous in my hands. The ground seemed to tilt beneath me as I began to move toward the aisle, each step heavier than the last. My whole life, every sacrifice, every sleepless night reduced to this moment of dismissal. I pushed back my chair and forced myself to walk. Each stride toward the exit felt like wading through mud. I wanted to disappear before the pity in their eyes consumed me. Then a scrape of wood against marble echoed across the hall. A chair pushed back sharply. Nathaniel. He stood, jaw taut, eyes blazing, and gripped the microphone. His voice thundered across the stunned silence. Before her mother leaves, there are things everyone here deserves to know. Gasps rippled. Serena's face drained of color. Nathaniel, stop. This is our wedding, she hissed, tugging at his sleeve. He pulled free, gaze locked on her with unshakable resolve. When we first met, Serena told me her mother was bitter, controlling, a burden she had to escape. I believed her. I thought I understood the woman I was marrying. But a few weeks ago, I spoke with Eliza, an old friend of Serena's, and I learned the truth. The room held its breath. My knees nearly buckled. Nathaniel turned toward me. His voice grew firmer. Berenice worked night shifts at the hospital, then picked up 2 more jobs just to keep food on the table. She sold her own home to pay Serena's tuition. She turned down marriage proposals from good men because she wanted nothing to interfere with raising her daughter. My vision blurred with tears. The weight of years unacknowledged suddenly laid bare. I saw Serena's lips tremble, her entire body rigid, her mask of confidence slipping away. Nathaniel's next words cut through the hall like glass shattering. I will not marry a woman who can discard the very person who gave her everything. Serena, I can't go through with this. He slipped the ring from his finger and set it down on the head table with a sharp finality. The room erupted, gasps, whispers, the scrape of chairs as people shifted uneasily. Serena crumpled, her sobs breaking against the silence. Nathaniel, please, don't do this, she cried, reaching for him. I stood frozen, my heart torn between agony and a strange, fragile relief. After years of invisibility, someone had finally spoken the truth. And it wasn't me. It was the man my daughter thought would secure her perfect life. The ballroom had dissolved into chaos the moment Nathaniel set the ring down. Whispers raced from table to table, a few guests lifting their phones to capture the scene as if it were theater instead of heartbreak. I stood rooted to the spot, the music box pressed against me, the world tilting like a dream I couldn't wake from. Nathaniel's voice cut through the din, sharp and steady. I spoke with Eliza, Serena's old friend. She told me Serena erased every trace of her mother online because she was ashamed that her mother had worked as a nurse, ashamed of her modest beginnings. The words hit me like a blow. The chatter died instantly. I felt the silence ripple through the crowd, heavier than any judgment. The spotlight that moments earlier had bathed Serena in glory now felt like an interrogation lamp, exposing every crack she had tried to plaster over. Serena's shriek broke the stillness. Enough! This is our wedding! You don't get to destroy it! Nathaniel didn't flinch, his gaze locked on hers, his voice like iron. It's because this is our wedding that I have to face the truth. And the truth is I can't marry a woman who denies her own mother. His words seared through me, but they weren't wounds. They were vindication. Then he went further. Eliza told me she saw your mother trudging through snow after a double shift, carrying dinner in one hand and your homework in the other, before walking you to take the settee at dawn. A woman who sacrifices like that isn't bitter. She's extraordinary. And yet you made her into a villain. I swayed, clutching the back of a chair for balance. Tears stung my eyes, but they weren't just of pain. They were of being seen. For the first time in years, someone spoke aloud what I had buried in silence. Across the room, Serena's body gave way. She collapsed onto the polished floor, sobs tearing out of her throat, her white gown crumpling beneath her like broken wings. Mascara streaked her cheeks, her lips trembling around words she couldn't form. Her future in-laws stared, unmoving. The woman she'd called Mom moments earlier turned her back and walked out. Guests shifted in their seats, embarrassed, some quietly leaving. And in that glittering hall, filled with roses and crystal and everything my daughter thought she wanted, the illusion finally shattered. The Boston night cut like ice as I stepped outside, my breath curled white in the air. Across the street, a park bench waited under the dim glow of a street lamp. I sank onto it, clutching the music box to my chest, and for the first time since the ceremony began, I inhaled deeply. The cold steadied me. Footsteps pounded behind me. Serena's sobs reached me before she did. She stumbled forward, her gown torn at the hem, her face streaked and raw. She dropped to her knees on the frozen ground, grasping at my hands. "Mother, please tell him you forgive me. Tell Nathaniel you don't hate me. I can't lose him." Her grip was desperate, clawing, but I pulled back, my voice breaking yet firm. "You didn't lose him because of me. You lost him because of you." She shook her head wildly. "I only wanted him to be proud of me. I thought if he knew everything, he'd look down on me. I didn't mean—" I tightened my hold on the music box, the cool silver biting into my palms. "You didn't need to make me small for you to stand tall, but you chose to." The words tasted of blood and sorrow, but once spoken, they freed me. My chest cracked open, pain spilling out, but so did something else, a strange, quiet release. For years I had begged for scraps of her approval. Tonight, I wasn't begging. Serena's sobs tore at me, but I didn't bend. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I pulled it out with trembling hands. Eliza's name lit the screen. I answered, her voice urgent, steady. I told him everything, Berenice. He needed to know, and he deserved to. "Serena, she's changed. She's not the girl I grew up with. She treats you like a burden. But I used to envy her. I envied that she had a mother who never stopped fighting for her." Her words steadied me like a hand on my shoulder. I hung up slowly, the air raw against my cheeks. Serena slumped at my feet, muttering apologies between sobs, but the night seemed to swallow her cries. I lifted my face to the sky, clouds heavy and gray above the city. Loss and relief mingled inside me, tangled and inseparable. For the first time, I wondered if tonight wasn't just an ending. Perhaps it was the beginning of a different life, one where I was no longer waiting to be chosen. Weeks slipped by after the wedding collapsed, each day marked by the same routine of silence. My cabin sat still at the edge of the New Hampshire woods, a place I had once loved for its quiet but now felt like a tomb. When I walked down to the store, neighbors offered tight smiles and pitying eyes. They had read the headlines, seen the videos, whispered the story. Their looks cut deeper than words. That poor woman, humiliated by her own daughter. I moved through those days like a ghost. I cleaned. I walked. I sat on the porch at dusk, but everything felt hollow. The music box remained on the dresser, unopened, a reminder of love that had no place to land. Then one gray morning, the phone rang. I almost didn't answer, thinking it was another neighbor checking in, but the voice that came through was steady, low, and unexpected. "Berenice, it's Nathaniel." I froze. He hesitated a moment, then continued, "I owe you an apology, and I have something to ask you." A week later, I found myself sitting across from him in a small cafe in Concord, the kind of place with wood-paneled walls and the smell of cinnamon in the air. He looked older than I remembered, as though the wreckage of the wedding had carved lines into his face. Yet his eyes were clear, focused. He slid a folder across the table. "I've been working on this," he said, opening it to reveal sketches and blueprints. A community center for women who've given their lives to others and then been forgotten. I stared at the drawings. Bright common rooms, workspaces, a kitchen, a garden. He leaned in. "I've seen too many stories like yours, mothers who sacrificed everything and ended up invisible. I want to build something that gives them dignity back, and I want you to help me lead it." My hands trembled as I traced the lines on the page. Me, Nathaniel, I was a nurse. I worked shifts. I raised a child. I've never led anything in my life. His eyes didn't waver. You've led more than you think. You've led by surviving, by enduring. I can draw walls and doors. But you, he tapped the folder, you can give it a soul. The words cracked something open inside me. For so long, I had been defined by rejection, by the silence of unanswered calls, by the weight of not being chosen. And here, across this modest table, a man was asking me not for sacrifice, but for my voice, my story, my worth. Tears blurred the sketches until they became colors and lines. I covered my face, weeping quietly, not because of Serena this time, not because of what I had lost, but because for the first time in decades, I was being seen as more than someone's mother. I was being asked to exist for myself. 3 months later, I stood before a freshly painted brick building with a simple sign, New Haven Women's Haven. The autumn air was crisp, leaves crunching underfoot as volunteers bustled around, setting up chairs and tables. I held the keys in my hand, disbelief still humming in my chest. The first weeks had been a whirlwind. Phone calls to donors who turned me down, letters to local organizations, nights spent at my kitchen table drafting plans with Nathaniel. There had been moments I nearly quit, moments I thought, who am I to do this? But slowly, people began to listen. A retired teacher offered to run workshops. A church donated supplies. A local grocer promised food deliveries, piece by piece. It came alive. And then the women began to arrive. One was a 70-year-old mother whose son had moved across the country and never called again. She cried as she told me she hadn't had a birthday cake in a decade. Another was a widow who had scrubbed office floors her whole life, her back bent, but her spirit unbroken. A third was a woman who lived alone in an apartment where no one ever knocked. She confessed that she had forgotten the sound of laughter. We sat together in that bright new hall, the scent of fresh paint mixing with coffee brewing in the kitchen. I wound the music box and let its delicate notes fill the room, then trembling. I told them a story I had never spoken aloud in public, of trudging through snow after a night shift, carrying dinner for Serena, then waking her for the SAT exam before collapsing from exhaustion. When I finished, the room was silent. Then, one by one, women began to weep. Some reached for my hands, others simply nodded, eyes shining. In that moment, I was no longer the woman cast aside at her daughter's wedding. I was a mirror in which they saw themselves. I looked around, heart swelling, and whispered inside my chest, maybe this is the family I was meant to choose. Standing there, surrounded by women who had been broken yet still stood, I realized I had not just survived humiliation, I had transformed it. For the first time in years, I wasn't invisible. I was the center of something that mattered. One afternoon, the heavy doors of the center swung open, and there she was. Serena stood trembling in the doorway, her once perfect hair hanging in tangled strands, dark circles bruised beneath her eyes, her dress wrinkled like she had slept in it for days. She collapsed into sobs the moment she saw me. "Mother," she choked out, clutching at her chest. "I've lost everything. Nathaniel is gone. My job, my apartment, gone. Please let me stay with you." The sight of her like that might once have broken me, but I had learned too much in these past months. I steadied my voice, firm but not cruel. "You don't need a place to hide. Serena, you need to learn how to live differently." Her eyes widened, desperate. "You've always forgiven me. You've always taken me back." I shook my head slowly. "Not anymore. If you want a way back, start with therapy. Show me change, not tears. She froze, stunned into silence. The daughter who had always counted on my unconditional surrender suddenly found herself staring at a wall. She could not move. I turned away, leaving her seated on the front steps of the center, her sobs echoing against the brick. For the first time, it was she who was left outside, not me. 2 years passed. The center blossomed into something larger than I dared dream. Job training classes filled the rooms. The cafe buzzed with chatter. The reading corner overflowed with borrowed books. I had become a public face, invited to speak at events, praised as a voice for women once forgotten. And then, one bright afternoon, Serena appeared again, not broken this time, but different. Her hair was neatly tied back, her clothes simple, her eyes no longer sharp with defiance, but softened with humility. She approached me after a speech, her hands clasped tightly. "Mother," she said quietly, "I didn't come to beg forgiveness. I came to meet you again. As the strong woman I never really knew." I studied her, letting the silence stretch. Finally I said, "If you've truly changed, start by listening, not demanding." Tears shimmered in her eyes as she told me of the years spent volunteering at a shelter for battered women, how she had seen sacrifice and resilience firsthand. My chest tightened. Part of me ached to reach for her. Part of me held back. I felt both wary and moved, the pull of old love tangled with the hard lessons I had earned. Perhaps this was the beginning of something new, but I knew one truth with certainty. I would never again lose myself in being only her mother. The hall shimmered in the soft glow of morning light as more than 300 women filled the seats for the center's 5th anniversary. From the podium, I looked out at faces once shadowed by despair, now lifted with hope. "My life," I said, letting the silence embrace my words. Once felt like it ended the day my daughter cast me out of her wedding, but that moment was only the beginning. It taught me I never needed anyone else to define my worth. Applause swelled, echoing through the hall. At the back, Serena sat quietly, tears streaming, her slight nod a fragile admission. I turned to the women beside me, my chosen family, and knew at last I belonged. Outside, the sign New Haven Women's Haven gleamed beneath the rising sun.